So first up, get ready. ChatGPT now has eyes, ears, and internet access. So OpenAI just announced a plugin system for ChatGPT, and this plugin system enables it to interact with the wider world through the internet. The plugins are developed in large part by third party companies like Expedia, Instacart, and Slack, and they allow users to perform a variety of tasks that use these sites from right within ChatGPT. So you can be instructing ChatGPT to accomplish tasks, and it will rely on plugins from these sites to do so. So OpenAI itself is actually hosting three of these plugins. One is a plugin that gives ChatGPT access to up to date information on the internet. There's a Python code interpreter, and there's also a retrieval plugin that allows users to ask questions of your own documents, files, notes, emails, and also for public documentation. So what's also really important to note here, I think, is that of the plugins initially announced, one of them is a plugin with Zapier, which itself integrates with thousands of other tools. So acting as kind of a force multiplier in how many tools you can start using ChatGPT with right out of the box. Now, as of today, there's a wait list to access the plugins for developers and ChatGPT Plus users. So we are eagerly awaiting the ability to connect ChatGPT to elements of the internet and also other really popular services that we use every day. So I wanted to kick things off, Paul, and ask you, did we just open up a whole new world of AI use cases for marketers, business people, individuals? Like what should we be thinking about here first?
Yeah, it's a really big deal. So the main things, if you look at the announcement page, there's actually like they have their documentation, kind of the explanation, some of what you were just going through. I think the key thing to focus on is, as you said, to right now, GPT-4, um, its training data basically ends around September 2021. So anything that has occurred, any new information, new context, events, none of that is in its knowledge base. And so first, obviously connecting to the internet, the browsing capability is key. Now, I actually do have access to that. So if you're a Chat GPT Plus user, you can join the wait list. I got access pretty quickly. I would say it was like 3 hours after they announced this. I was able to get the browser access. I do not have any of the other plugins, so I can't speak specifically to them. But the browser one works really well. And it's interesting because it'll actually tell you what page it's looking at to
Hmm.
find the question. So let's say like right now we're in the final four for men's basketball, college basketball. So if I were to say which teams are in the final four, it may actually show like querying ESPN.com. Like it'll tell you where it's looking for the information, summarizing the information, and then it actually spits it out. And so you can actually see now, where did it get this from? How did it summarize this information? And you can actually start to see how it might actually drive traffic back to the source a little bit more than before, where you just like weren't really seeing where it was getting the information from.
Hmm.
So just that on its own is a really practical use case. But previously, all it could do was emit text. And so you had alluded to this, but this is moving into that like world of bits stuff we talked about in a previous episode, where the AI's agents can actually start taking actions on your behalf. So whether it's booking trips or getting you a reservation at a restaurant. Like as you start plugging in all of these different applications and data sources, you can actually not only access that proprietary information, you can take action, or the agent can take action on your behalf. So that's the thing that's like really key. So on the browser aspect where it's getting real-time information, it can start to solve, we've talked about this hallucination issue or just make stuff up. That enables you to start solving for that. But that access to proprietary information becomes a really critical component. And so like when it first came out, you kind of watch for what are other people saying. So there's this guy, Dr. Jim Fan, who's a AI scientist at NVIDIA, and he tweeted, OpenAI just announced ChatGPT plugins. If ChatGPT's debut was the iPhone event, today is the iOS App Store event. And that was kind of a universal thing. I saw that a number of times. There was another one, Dharmesh said the GPT-4 launch was big. The ChatGPT plugins launch is even bigger. OpenAI took the chat interface and turned it into a chat ecosystem. It's the app store for chat. So I think for people who are trying to like understand, well, what actually is it? Imagine your iPhone before it had all the apps and the utility you have in your iPhone with all of these apps. But rather than you having to keep like going into all these apps, you're just going to do everything through text communication. So you'll be in the Chat GPT interface, and anything you want, you can just ask it of. So maybe you plug in your analytics data or your CRM data or your sales pipeline information, and you can just ask questions of it without having to like leave that interface. And the Zapier integration you mentioned is a critical one because they have what, 5,000 or something
Yeah.
app integrations. So on their site, like there's a page we'll link to. They say we're excited to share that Zapier ChatGPT plugin is part of the first batch of providers in this new ecosystem. This new product now in beta can pull in thousands of apps from your tech stack and allows you to automate tasks directly with ChatGPT's interface. So again, you're in ChatGPT in your browser, and you can now have access to anything Zapier is connected to in your tech stack. It's powered by their natural language actions API. Again, actions is a word you're just going to keep hearing over and over again, that you can use simple natural language to complete actions in other apps. You can ask it to execute any of Zapier's 50,000 actions. So search, update, write, whatever it is, turns your chat into action. It can write emails, then send it for you, find context in your CRM, update them directly, add rows to a spreadsheet, Slack message, anything you can imagine you can do. And then they kind of end with that the ChatGPT plugin for Zapier is just the beginning, but it can already extend the power of AI chatbots, allowing users to go beyond simple conversations and instead perform business critical tasks with thousands of apps. After all, if chatbots can perform actions in the real world, the sky is your limit when powering your work. So I think that to me is the biggest takeaway here is like, not only is all of a sudden ChatGPT is a platform, like now we're going to start doing more and more things. We're not just going to be writing content or doing searches. You're going to be able to interact with all these plugins, and it's going to be just a flood of plugins. Like it's going to be wild how quickly these things come in. And the other thing I'll say is it kind of reminds me of like what Alexa wanted to be with all
Mm.
those skills, and like how you were just supposed to be able to ask Alexa for stuff, but then you never had a clue what it actually knew how to do or what it was connected to. And so for me, at least, Alexa just never delivered on the utility it was promising. And I just stopped using it really early on. And it's kind of like what Siri should have been, or maybe still might try and be.
Mm.
But I don't know. I mean, it's a major move by them to become a true utility, and all through text, language and chat. It's kind of fascinating.
Talk to us a little bit more about the App Store, the OpenAI App Store. I mean, it feels like this is a game-changing ecosystem. I mean, like you said, it turns this into a platform. What are the implications here? Are we going to see every single popular service and company have a ChatGPT plugin?
Sure seems that way. I mean, just again, this is all, what is this, like 72 hours old? Like it's pretty fresh. Um, but I mean, my immediate thing was I started thinking about analytics data. Like the first
Mhm.
obvious use case to me is like, let's say you use QuickBooks or Stripe or even Google Analytics. I don't know if it would work with Google, but think about all the places where you have data living and that you have to go in and look for reporting. So like I got to go into HubSpot, I got to go into QuickBooks for this and HubSpot for that and Salesforce for this and my social media platform for that. And like, just imagine it all is just connected to ChatGPT instead. And rather than having all these places you go log into, you can literally just ask anything of the ChatGPT interface, and it'll just pull from the appropriate plugin. So now I don't necessarily have to go log in to find that information. And we've talked about it on the show before. How many times are we zooming each other, like sending a quick message in Slack or whatever, and saying, "Hey, like where are we at with AI for Writer Summit registration? How many people did registered yesterday after the newsletter went out? What was the open rate of that email?" And I just gave you 3 different tasks, and now it's
Mhm.
like, oh man, okay. And now we got to go in. Someone on the team's got to go in and like pull 3 different reports, and you spend like 7 minutes, minimum, just to like grab 3 data points.
Right.
Now imagine that same scenario. I'm just in ChatGPT at 12 o'clock at night, like whatever. I'm in the middle doing something. I think, oh, where are we at with that? And I just asked ChatGPT instead, and it's connected to HubSpot. And it's like, hey, where are we at with this registration total? Spits it out. How many people registered yesterday? Spits it out. Did anybody register at companies with more than a billion in revenue? Spits out a list of those people. It's just like, so now we truly get to that world of bits concept where not only do I have access to real time information, but I can say, hey, send the team a reminder tomorrow morning to follow up with anybody that's over a billion in revenue. Like those are ICP, whatever. So now you can start to actually do strategy and action on top of this data set. And so that's, it's really, I haven't had time to honestly sit down and really think about this deeply about all the implications of this.
Yeah.
But I do think it's just going to explode in terms of how many plugins there's going to be and the utility of those plugins. It's going to create massive complexity again because nobody knows what to do about this. Like, again, we're still trying to explain what language models are to people and
Yeah.
what ChatGPT is. Like, I'm like, when we do our intro to AI for marketers class, I think last time we had 81% of people said they had experimented with ChatGPT. We asked that question up front. That was last week. When I was at the Pavilion event, the CMO summit, I asked, and I don't know, like 20, 30% of the people in the room had done it.
Mm.
So this is the C-suite. So, I mean, we're still at a moment while, people listening to this podcast are probably racing ahead. You've been experimenting with ChatGPT since the day it came out. You probably got Dolly and Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. And like, you're probably early adopter of all this tech. And this isn't new to you. But I'm telling you right now, the agencies Mike is talking to, the CMOs I'm talking to, they don't know all this stuff. It's abstract to them. They're still afraid of it in a lot of ways. And they're not racing forward and testing it like you may be. And so I think sometimes we even get caught in our own little bubble because we talk about this stuff all the time and we see it and we experiment with it. That is not the norm. Like, don't assume that people in the marketing and business world have even remotely figured this stuff out yet, because they have not. The amount of change we've seen since December 1st of last year it is literally like 5 years of innovation packed into 4 months. And a lot of people have not caught up yet. Sometimes I feel like I'm not caught up. It's like you turn the internet off for like 4 hours during the day and you're like, well, what the hell just happened? Like,
Yeah.
I missed how many announcements in 4 hours? Like, okay. So yeah, I think it's just going to be, it's going to be a really big deal. And I'm not sure we really comprehend how big of a deal yet.
So before we move on to our second topic, I wanted to really quickly hit on this one point, and you can talk as much or as little about this as you see fit, but I felt like when I read this announcement in one fell swoop, OpenAI just caused an existential threat for thousands of existing startups, plugins, services, features that people are building. How does this impact builders, founders, or investors?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. There was David Sachs, who is one of the early PayPal guys and early investors in Facebook, and we've talked about him before. They have the All In podcast, which is like the number one business podcast in the world. He had tweeted, plugins could create an interesting network effect for OpenAI. Developers provide the AI with more info in order to access capabilities. AI gets smarter. Developers want to use the smartest AI. AI sucks in all the world's knowledge. So it's like, oh, just this little thing. So I think there's going to be a race to build on top of this, because I think it's where people are going to go. But it does then create these challenges for software companies. It's like, well, are people going to stop coming to our platform then? Like, is it going to change the way people use the software we have? Is it going to change how quickly existing software companies could be obsoleted? Like, does the threat matrix actually, did it just move on these software companies? Because there was one other tweet I saw, and this is a little technical, but like, just bear with me for a second. It says, I've developed a lot of plugin systems, and the OpenAI ChatGPT plugin interface might be the damn craziest and most oppressive approach I've ever seen in computing in my entire life. For those who aren't aware, you write an OpenAI manifest for your API, which, again, I don't do this stuff, but that's not very hard to do if this is what you do. Use human language descriptions for everything, and that's it. You let the model figure out how to do everything else. So basically, you just say, here, OpenAI, we have all this data, all this information living up here in this CRM or whatever it is. Here's our API. You connect the things, and then you basically just tell it what you want it to have access to, and then it just does everything else. So basically, that my takeaway is it's insanely simple to build plugins, is pretty much what this says. So this ChatGPT plugins are super simple to implement. Basically, just document your API, but for a language model rather than human. And let me just, I want to make sure I give proper attribution here. This is Mitchell Hashimoto, who is founder of HashiCorp. So, and that was retweeted by Greg Brockman, the CTO of OpenAI. So I know he's a legitimate source. So I'm just picking some random person here. Um, so yeah, I think it's going to be very disruptive. I don't know yet how or how exactly it's going to play out or how quickly,
Hmm.
but it sure seems like, again, if you're a software company, like every week you just got to be like head on a swivel. Like what is going on? I got to imagine SaaS companies saw this coming. Like nobody was talking about this that I knew of before
Right.
this happened, but it sure seems like an obvious play in retrospect that they would do this.